So yeah, then what we did is we had a very nice break. I have to say a huge thank you to our exhibitors, because they kind of really supported with us on the day. And then we went into, we had two lots of workshops, 6 altogether, 3 running concurrently. And I think this is Lucy, and I think Lucy's with Adam. I can't quite see, my eyesight's not very good. But as I say, we had the first lot of workshops, and the purpose of the workshops were an opportunity for those participants to really discuss kind of 3 areas where potentially we could do things differently. And if we were, what were the opportunities, what are the risks, and what would we need to do at Foundations to kind of support a different way of working around the 6 areas that we looked at. So we had Karen Owens from ProCare and Nicola Jackson, who is an occupational therapist from Stockport, and they explored the risks and opportunities around self and remote assessment, and again thinking about what we would need to do at Foundations to kind of help services to do that differently. So they did that workshop. Then we had Adam and Ray Rochester from Closomat that talked about the role of manufacturers and the opportunities of manufacturers and suppliers supporting occupational therapists in terms of the assessment process. So I think we've got Adam here this afternoon. Adam, do you just want to talk about just kind of what kind of things that you discussed? What were the risks people identified? What were the opportunities, and kind of what we need to do at Foundations to kind of move that forward if we were to move it forward?
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks, Rachel. The day was so long and packed that I think when we did this summary at the end of the day, your brain was so frazzled. I hope I've remembered it all. We focused predominantly on the aspects on adaptations without delay, which talk about working in collaboration with manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers, where it says that they need to be client-centered and they need to be able to demonstrate that they're client-centered and safe. And we use those 2 elements really as the starting point about how we would expect manufacturers, distributors to demonstrate safety, and that we came up with the various sort of governance structures that you might expect. Does the bits of equipment comply with legislation, and do they have the certification that they need? Which of our trust we're using them, you would expect to happen, would expect to be the case. But more than that, how do sales teams or product experts, how do they demonstrate to us that they are safe to do their job and to support us in a way that might make our job or our time more efficient? So we talked there about whether there's opportunity for certain kite marks. We linked it a bit to trusted assessor model, but without going into too much depth, because Claire had her own workshop on that. And whether people were aware of the role of the BHTA in that, and whether manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers were BHTA registered, and what kind of governance structures that put in place. The client-centered element, we could have probably talked about all day, because the starting point of that for us in the workshop was to challenge systems that are already in place and whether they are client-centered themselves, and whether if they're not, whether it's too much of an expectation for the suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors to be client-centered in a way that we as occupational therapists use the term. So we kind of broke that definition down a little bit more and challenged what client-centeredness was. For the manufacturers and distributors in the room, they gave us some feedback about what they expected client-centeredness to be, and the feedback was predominantly about what was available on the market, and how the market has changed so much that it allows them to meet the needs of so many more people. And then we as occupational therapists talked about actually what we mean about client-centeredness, and how they might be able to demonstrate that. I think ultimately the workshop came up with a list of actions. There was no, we couldn't have expected there to be a definite, this is what you need to be able to do, and this is how you do it. I think it's a far bigger conversation that needs to be had and taken up outside of the session, and I know you are aware of that, Rachel, and you will. But there was certainly the consensus in the room that those groups either do already help occupational therapists in a fantastic way, where we rely on them to be innovative and to design product that help meet our clients' needs. Through COVID and beyond, these companies developed new and innovative ways of supporting us with assessments and continue to do so. There was some discussion about how the OT can be negated in that process, maybe some of the less complex clients, but then how if the person still required a DFG application, the application itself is still required by the occupational therapist through the local authority. So how those links and how that whole system kind of links up to ensure that it actually isn't just creating a middleman, and how we explore that in more depth. So no real answers, I'm sorry, but there was an awful lot of food for thought, and something that I think we probably could have had a 2-day conference in its own right on.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think events like this often do raise more questions than the answers, but I think it is about moving the conversation forward, isn't it? And appetite for change, and at least we are discussing these kind of things. And who never knows, we might get a 2-day conference next year, Adam. So yeah, thanks ever so much. And then Adam's already kind of mentioned, we had Clare Barber that talked about trusted assessor models. So one of the things, as I've already mentioned, as regional advisors, we're really aware and really positive to see lots of local authorities embracing that trusted assessor model. But we're also aware that sometimes it doesn't always work so well. So we had Clare Barber run a workshop around trusted assessor model and kind of, again, the risks, opportunities, and so that particularly around how you make that very resilient, robust trusted assessor model. So we've got Clare here this afternoon. Clare, do you just want to talk again a little bit around what you talked about, what the conversations looked like, what kind of risks people identified, what the opportunities are, and kind of what we need to do at Foundations if we're going to kind of support local authorities to adopt trusted assessor model?
Yeah, sure. Brilliant. Thank you. So we just started the session off by kind of looking back at where trusted assessor came from, and nearly 20 years ago, 2005, when it actually was a thing. It was actually started to get equipment to people quicker when the community equipment services were integrated. So it was really interesting to look back over the last 20 years and see how far it's come as trusted assessor, now being used in DFGs, so quite a long way. The room was really, really good group of people, and we had a lot of different professions. So we had OTs, we had trusted assessors, which was great. So people have already been through the training. We had caseworkers, we had managers. It was a really good mix. And everybody all was quite positive about the trusted assessor process. But obviously, as Rachel mentioned, there were some pitfalls. So we covered 3 kind of main topics. And the first one was around what we need to do to get or make a good trusted assessor service. And the clear things that came from that is making sure there's some sort of standardization nationally across the board, so that the people who are trusted assessors are working to the same standards, and that everyone kind of knows what to expect from people. It was really clear that you can't just train a couple of people and send them off on their way, that there definitely needs to be some ongoing support for that person, be it an OT that can mentor them, or ongoing refreshing their skills, anything that will help support moving that role forward. but also having some clear expectations and boundaries around trusted assessors so that the person is clear what they can and cannot do, or what they should or should not do, and making sure they're comfortable and confident with that. And I think that came across, as Rachel mentioned, years ago when we created with Foundations the level 4 course. I, like Rachel, was persecuted, I suppose you could say, for suggesting that adaptations didn't always have to be an occupational therapist. And it was so pleasing to be at this event, because it feels like that we've come on a little way, and actually there is some trust there now. But I think the reason for that is because services have put these boundaries in, and they have made it really clear what is sort of able to be assessed by a trusted assessor, and that needs to be more defined and more nationally sort of standardized, people were saying. I think there was a lot of conversation around transferable skills. So if you are a trusted assessor, what does that mean? What does that look like? And if I go to a different job, can I still use those skills somewhere else? And again, that's around that kind of national piece of work. And actually, it's about making sure that that person's skill level is there. Unfortunately, not everybody has got the necessarily have the skill or the ability to be a good trusted assessor. If you asked me to be a handy person, your house would be a mess. There'd be holes everywhere and shelves on the floor. I am just not a handy person. Luckily, I became an OT. So it's about making sure that we recognize when we're training people that there will be people this just doesn't suit, and that we can't expect everybody to be trusted assessors. Some of the issues and the worst issue that potentially came up was death, that all our trusted assessors are out there killing people because they're not assessing correctly. And obviously, joking aside, there is a risk. As far as I'm aware, we haven't had any trusted assessors having killed anybody from a poor prescription, but I don't want to be quoted on that if something happens in the future. However, again, it's around this, making sure that we're boundaried when we're looking at trusted assessors. But a lot of the risks were around complaints, reputation to the organisation, not safely prescribing, over-prescribing, under-prescribing. There were words around setting off loose cannons. However, it was quite clear that when we pulled all that together, that doesn't actually just apply to trusted assessors. That could be anyone. You could have, poor staff in any profession, and you can have good staff in any profession, and it's about that management of those staff. And actually, reputationally and complaints wise, some of the complaints and some of the reputational risk can be flipped, because having trusted assessors, we recognize, can actually benefit services by reducing waiting lists and allowing people that are already in conversation and already working with people to make that assessment of their need. So moving forward, just to summarize, we looked at what our outcomes, what things we could do. And as you've probably heard me say a few times, something about standardization, making it national. There is currently a national qualification, which nobody was really aware of. So I guess a little bit around awareness raising and making sure that people know what trusted assessor is, defining that and pointing them in the direction of what those national qualifications are and what they look like. Reviewing those competencies and ensuring the skill level is where it needs to be, and that consistency approach. So maybe around making sure there's sort of standardization across, and also around the kind of triaging piece as to who does what. And I think that came across quite clear, that there needs to be a really clear indication of what goes where. But a great session all over.
That's great, Claire. I think you make that point about the death, and I know Paul and I were talking about when you said that, because it was very stark the way that you said it in the feedback. But I think it's also about thinking about, actually, if we don't embrace these changes, actually what happens to those individuals that are just names on a wait list, and the potential risk of something adverse happening, which I don't think we always kind of think about. But thanks for that comprehensive feedback, Claire. Thank you.